A few days ago, JAXA attempted to launch 8 satellites using the Epsilon rocket. The Epsilon rocket is a small sat launcher capable of putting 600 kilograms into sun-synchronous orbit. To put that in perspective, that's about 3 times as much as the Electron rocket and about a tenth of the Falcon 9. When tasked with developing the Epsilon rocket, the engineers took the SRBs of the H2A as a basis for the first stage and ripped the third and fourth stages of the Mu-5 for the upper stages of the Epsilon rocket. This made the Epsilon rocket a third as expensive to fly as the Mu rocket and made development a lot cheaper and a lot easier. While the Epsilon rocket was first launched in 2013, its roots go way back to the 1990s. Hi, I'm Mai Cooney, and today I want to talk about the Epsilon rocket and the J-1 rocket that started it all. The idea for the Epsilon rocket started in the early 1990s with the J-1 rocket. The J in J-1 obviously stands for, say it with me now, joint. Yeah, the Japanese Wikipedia page does not elaborate on that, but it does make some sense, as it combined parts from the liquid fuel rocket program, spearheaded by NASA and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and the solid fuel rocket program, spearheaded by ISAS and IHI Corporation. This was before NASA and ISAS were merged into JAXA. The rocket will use the SRBs of NASA's, at the time, brand new H2 rocket as a first stage, and it would simply port over the second and third stage of ISAS's Mu-3S2. The idea was that this would provide a slightly cheaper and more capable rocket than the Mu-3S2. Now, the SRBs didn't have much in the way of guidance or control, so brand new Vernier engines had to be developed for the J-1. The Mu-3S2, the previous generation of Japanese solid fuel rockets, also didn't have much in the way of guidance. They just kinda went. So the J-1 rocket, external Vernier engines, or EVE for short, was something that the Japanese needed to develop essentially from scratch. This made EVE so expensive that it cancelled out any other savings they were hoping to get out of the J-1. Nevertheless, the Mu-3S2 was never launched again after its introduction. The J-1 launched only once, and not even into orbit. On Monday, February 12, 1996, the J-1 rocket placed the HYFLEX test vehicle into a suborbital trajectory. The goal of HYFLEX was to test technologies needed for the HOPE spaceplane, which might get a video all of its own. Now, while the launch was a success, the recovery of HYFLEX failed because a cable connecting the vehicle to a floater snapped, causing it to sink. A second launch of the J-1 was planned for 2002. That's 6 years after the first launch. The second launch would have made use of an H2A SRB, as the H2 was no longer flying by this point. But this was postponed and later cancelled due to a change of plans for the Japanese space program. The Mu-5 rocket that flew in its stead all this time was not cheaper, and in an effort to save costs, they decided to start the development of a new rocket in 2006. This was to become the Epsilon rocket. They wanted to get about 2/3 the capacity of the Mu-5 rocket for 1/3 the cost. 2/3 the capacity was easy, but they would end up having to settle for just 2/3 the cost. On later iterations of the Epsilon rocket, they were able to improve the capacity, but reducing costs has thus far remained elusive. But maybe soon, they'll be able to achieve it. They are hoping to make the next generation of Epsilon rockets, the Epsilon-S, 30% cheaper. The rocket is to have even less dead weight, even more power, and be even more cheaper, just like the H3 rocket. It's no surprise then that the first stage for the Epsilon-S will be H3 SRBs, and the rocket will share many of the avionics. The first Epsilon-S is supposed to launch next year, launching the Vietnamese Earth observation satellite Lotus-Sat-1. I can imagine some of you sitting there eyeing the comment section saying, "But wait a minute, this all sounds an awful lot like the European Vega rocket." Yeah, Europe and Japan are buddies like that. Both started the development of a smallish spaceplane at the end of the 1980s, they cancelled it, and now they have to rely on Americans and Russians to launch astronauts to the ISS, where they both have one large module, a lab attached to the size of Harmony. They both started resupply missions to the ISS in 2008, even though early plans would have had them launch those at the start of the decade. They both had plans to turn these spacecraft into Soyuz-style crew vehicles that inevitably didn't go anywhere. Am I cherry-picking these examples there? Absolutely, but I still think it's cute. Official plans for the Vega rocket popped up at the end of 1996, There are only so many ways to go pointy end up, flamey end down, so it may only be a coincidence that ESA came up with a similar idea to the idea the Japanese had. They would use the SRBs of the Ariane 5 rocket as the first stage for the Vega rocket. The upper stages would also be solid fuel stages, the Zefiro 23 and Zefiro 9. These stages were originally developed with the intent to use them on Italian rockets for the San Marco program. This never happened, however. Italy instead joined ESA's rocket program. Much like the Japanese Epsilon-S, the new generation of Vega rockets, the Vega-C, uses the SRBs of their upcoming Ariane 6, which are supposed to be a lot cheaper. The Ariane 6 is the next generation of European rockets, development for which started in the 2010s to slash launch cost, and subsequently increased launch cadence. It was originally supposed to launch in 2020, though this has since been delayed to 2023. Who writes this stuff? It's like nothing original happens at all anymore. Though, to be clear, I love them both. I just think it's funny, and more rockets is always more better. I'm super excited for both the Vega-C and the Epsilon-S rockets, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments down below. When the Epsilon-S inevitably launches, I'll be right here on this channel to cover the launch, so subscribe to catch it when that happens, and until then, I'll see you next time.